Cold Comfort Farm by Stella Gibbons, Chapter 18. When Seth returned wearing his best hat and his overcoat and carrying a suitcase, everybody moved toward the door. Mr. Neck's car was waiting for him in the yard, and he hung on to Seth's arm every step of the way there, as though he feared Seth would change his mind. He need not have. Seth's face had the usual expression it bore in repose, an insolent complacency. Of course he was going to be a film star. When once he had got over the first shock, he wanted to look as if the whole affair seemed perfectly natural to him. He was too conceited to show the fierce joy that surged deep within him. Yet there it surged, a tide of dark gold splendor, deep below the crust of his complacent acceptance. Well, everything was boiling along swimmingly, and Flora was just patting the still choking Mr. Mybug on the back, while they all stood round the door of the car saying goodbye, when the ominous sound of a window being pushed up was heard, and before they could all look up, a voice floated out into the quiet air of the late afternoon. It was, observing that it had seen something nasty in the woodshed. Everybody looked up, Flora in some dismay. Sure enough, it was Aunt Ada Doom. The window of her room, which was directly above the kitchen door, was open, and she was leaning heavily out, supporting herself upon her hands. A shape hovered in the dusk room behind her left shoulder, endeavoring to see over her vasty bulk. By the untidiness of hair, it was Judith. Another shape hovered on the right shoulder. Going by nothing but a woman's intuition, it was Rennet. "Oh, mercy," said Flora hastily in an undertone to Mr. Neck. "Hurry up and go." "What? Is that Grandma?" inquired Mr. Neck. "And who's the platinum blonde at the back? Come on, sweetheart." He hustled Seth into the car. "We've got to make that flyer." Seth, where are you going?" Judith's voice was a throbbing rod of terror and anguish. "I saw something nasty in the woodshed," screamed Aunt Ada Doom, flapping about her with something which Flora recognized as all that was left of the Cowkeeper's Weekly Bulletin and Milk Producer's Guide. "My baby, my darling, you mustn't leave me. I shall go mad. I can't bear it." "Can it?" muttered Mr. Neck, but aloud he called politely, waving his hand at Aunt Ada. Well, how's the girl?" "Seth, you mustn't go," Judith implored, her voice a dry whine of terror. "You can't leave your mother. There's the spring onion harvest, too. 'Tis men's work. You mustn't go." "I saw something nasty in the woodshed." "Did it see you?" asked Mr. Neck, tucking himself into the car beside Seth. The engine started and the chauffeur began to back the car out of the yard. "Gee, ma'am, I know it's raw," shouted Mr. Neck, craning out of the window of the car and peering up at Aunt Ada. "I know it's tough, but gee, that's life, girl. You're living now, sweetheart. All that woodshed line, that was years ago. Young Woodley stuff. I respect a grandmother's feelings, sweetheart, but honest, I can't give him up. He'll send you $5,000 out of his first film." "Goodbye," said Seth to Flora, who returned his condescending smile with a friendly one of her own. She watched the car drive away. It was going to Cloud Cuckoo Land. It was going to the kingdom of Cockagain. It was going to Hollywood. Seth would never have a chance now of becoming a nice, normal young man. He would become a world-famous swollen mask. When next she saw him, it was a year later, and the mask smiled down at her in the drowsy darkness from a great silver screen. Seth Starkadder in small-town chic. Already, as the car receded, he was as unreal as Achilles. Seth! The car turned the curve and was gone. Still, the wailing voices of the women wound through the air like strung wires. It was hours before the stars would begin their idiot dance between the chimney pots. There was nothing to do in between except wail. Aunt Ada now retreated from the window. Flora could hear Judith having hysterics. She went on quietly, banging Mr. Mybug, who was still choking, saying, There, and wondering if she ought to go upstairs to Aunt Ada's room and diffuse a spot of the higher common sense. But no, the hour for that was not yet. She was roused from her reverie by Mr. Mybug, who peevishly dodged away from her hand, exclaiming between chokes, "I'm quite all right now, thanks," and went on choking in an irritating manner at some distance away. Suddenly his choke ceased. He was staring up at Aunt Ada's window, where Rennet had suddenly appeared, and was peering palely out into the evening. "Who's that?" asked Mr. Mybug in a low voice. "Rennet Starkadder," replied Flora. "What a marvellous face," said Mr. Mybug, still staring. "She has a brittle, hair-like quality. Don't you feel it?" He waved his fingers about. "She has that untamed look you see sometimes in newly born leverets. I wish Kropotkin could see her. He'd want to put her into plaster." Rennet was staring down at him, too. Flora could see it was quite a case. Oh well, it would be quite a good thing if he carried Rennet off to Fitzroy Square and set a new fashion in hair-faced beauties, except that she, Flora, must make quite sure, before they went, that he would be kind to poor Rennet, and be a good husband to her. Probably he would be. Rennet was very domesticated. She would mend Mr. Mybug's clothes, which nobody had ever done for him before, because, though all his girlfriends could embroider beautifully, none of them ever dreamed of mending anything. And cook him lovely, nourishing dinners, and fuss over him and simply adore him. He would become so comfortable he would not know himself and would be grateful to her. From these schemes she was aroused by Mr. Mybug. He walked across the yard until he stood directly beneath the window and called up boldly to Rennet, "I say, will you come for a walk with me?" "What, now?" asked Rennet timidly. Nobody had ever asked her to do such a thing before. "Why not?" laughed Mr. Mybug, looking boyishly up at her, with his head flung back. Flora thought it was a pity. He was rather fat. "I must ask Cousin Judith," said Rennet, glancing timidly over her shoulder into the darkened room. Then she withdrew into the shadows. Mr. Mybug was very pleased with himself. This was his idea of romance, Flora could see. She knew from experience that intellectuals thought the proper, nay, the only way to fall in love with somebody was to do it at the very instant you saw them. You met somebody and thought they were a charming person, so gay and simple, and then you walked home from a party with them, preferably across Hampstead Heath, about 3 a.m, discussing whether you should sleep together or not. Sometimes you asked them to go to Italy with you, sometimes they asked you to go to Italy, preferably to Portofino, with them. You held hands and laughed and kissed them and called them your true love. You loved them for 8 months, and then you met somebody else and began being gay and simple all over again, with small hours' walks across Hampstead, Portofino invitation and all. It was very simple, gay, and natural somehow. Anyway, Flora was beginning to feel that things were happening a little too quickly at Cold Comfort Farm. She had not yet recovered from the counting last night. Was it only last night? It seemed a month ago, and the departure of Amos. And already Seth had gone, and Mr. Mybug was falling in love with Rennet, and doubtless planning to carry her off. If things went on at this rate, there would soon be nobody left at the farm at all. She was extremely sleepy all of a sudden. She thought she would go and sit by the fire in her little green parlor and read until supper time. So she told Mr. Mybug she hoped he would have a pleasant walk, and added casually that Rennet had had a pretty septic life of it, on the whole, and hinted that she would probably appreciate a little gaiety and simplicity in the Fitzroy Square manner. Mr. Mybug said he quite understood. He also attempted to take her hand, but she foiled him. Since seeing Rennet at the window, he seemed to have a vague feeling that his one-sided affair with Flora was at an end, and that it was up to him to make some appropriate farewell remarks. "We're friends, aren't we?" he asked. "Certainly," said Flora pleasantly, nor did she trouble to inform him that she was not in the habit of thinking of persons whom she had known for 5 weeks as her friends. "We might dine together in town sometime." "That would be delightful," agreed Flora, thinking how nasty and boring it would be. "There's a quality in you," said Mr. Mybug, staring at her and waving his fingers, "remote somehow, and nymph-like, oddly unawakened. I should like to write a novel about you, and call it Virginal." "Do, if it passes the time for you," said Flora. "And now I really must go and write some letters, I am afraid. Goodbye." On her way to her parlor, she passed Rennet coming downstairs, dressed to go out. She wondered how she had managed to obtain permission from Aunt Ada Doom to do so, but Rennet did not wait to be questioned. She darted past Flora in a state of terror. Flora was extremely glad to get back to her parlor and to sink into a comfortable little armchair, covered in green tapestry, which stood by the fire. The refreshing Mrs. Beadle was there, clearing away the tea things. "Miss Elfine sent you her best love, Miss Flora, and she's gone to spend 6 weeks At Howchicker Hall, Mr. Dick came for her at lunchtime today. In his motor, said Mrs. Beadle. Nice-looking boy, ain't he? Very, said Flora. So she's gone, has she? Oh, well, that's splendid. Now the family will have some time to settle down and get over the engagement. And where's Urk? Is it true he's drowned Miriam? Mrs. Beadle snorted. It'd take more than him to drown her. No, he's as large as life and twice as natural down at mine playing with the kids. What? The jazz band? I mean, with Miriam's children? Yes, giving him rides on his back and pretending he's a water vole. Nasty things. Oh, you should have heard how Agony created when I let her on that our Miriam was going to marry one of them Starcatters. Create, I thought. He'd have to be picked off the ceiling. So she's really going to marry him? Asked Flora, leaning languidly back at her chair and enjoying the gossip. Mrs. Beadle gave her a look. So I should hope, Miss Post. I don't say as there's been anything wrong between them yet, but there ain't going to be neither until they're safely married. Agony stands firm by that. And what does old Mrs. Starcatter say to Urk marrying Miriam? She said she saw something nasty as usual. Well, if I'd sixpence for all the nasty things I've seen since I've been working at Cold Comfort, I could buy the place up. Not that I'd want to, come to that. I suppose, asked Flora idly, you haven't any idea what she really did see? Mrs. Beadle paused in the act of folding the tablecloth and regarded Flora earnestly, but all she said after the pause was that she couldn't say she was sure, so Flora pushed her inquiries no further. So I hear that Seth's gone too, was Mrs. Beadle's next remark. Coo, his mother won't half take on. Yes, he's gone to Hollywood to be a film star, said Flora sleepily. Mrs. Beadle said sooner in than her, and added that she wouldn't have a lot to tell Agony when she got home. So Agony likes a spot of gossip, does he? If it ain't spiteful he does. He always creates at me something awful when I finish telling him anything spiteful. Oh, well, I must be off now and get Agony's supper. Good night, Miss Post. Flora passed the rest of the evening quietly and pleasantly, and was in bed by 10. Her satisfaction with the way matters were progressing at the farm was complicated by the arrival of a postcard for her at 9 o'clock by the 9 o'clock post. It represented Canterbury Cathedral. The postmark was Canterbury. On the back was written, Praise the Lord. This morning I preached the Lord's word to thousands in the marketplace. I am now going out to hire one of they Ford vans. Tell Micah if he wants to drive it, he must come with me out of charity. I mean no wages. Praise the Lord. Send my flannel shirts. Fond love to all. A. Starcatter. And that is the end of chapter 18.